Well, let's back up for a minute because I just want to know, how does one start with this journey? Like, how did you start on your journey to becoming a composer? Can you tell us your current role, full journey, and anything that you've had to overcome along the way?
So my dad is a musician, and I, by virtue of my proximity to him, in being raised and then watching professional to professional what he did, I just enjoyed this very like courtside seat basically to how stuff worked, and I think that played a massive role. Of course, I just grew up very immersed in music, and everything belonged. There was no right genre or wrong genre. um, Music was music. It was just a big old playground. So I took piano lessons from a very early age, and I always found myself thinking or like overthinking while playing. I'd be in the middle of learning a piece, and then along the way, I'd think, well, why did they do this when they could have done that? And then start to sort of make it my own. And then a teacher would have to say, Mr. Schubert wasn't really interested in your opinion. Um, so
That's funny.
I, took piano lessons. I sang in choirs. I played the French horn through high school, and then went to music school in college and studied, um, you know, with even greater detail there. And then got out in the world and started making a place for myself. As far as writing is concerned, I always had melodies in my head, and I just thought everybody did, because you don't know to ask other people questions when you think that everything is normal, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it just is what it is. And so I didn't know to walk around and say, as a 5-year old, hey, do you listen to this melody and enjoy it in your head? That just it never dawned on me that people didn't have melodies in their heads. So from a very early age, I loved writing. I loved um, like sitting at the piano and making things up or improvising. Um, and then eventually those things were written down, and eventually those things that were written down were submitted for publication. And, you know, 40 plus years later, here we are.
Oh man, I have so many questions because I love how you talk about the foundation of you starting to be interested was really your family.
Mhm.
I mean, you had a good example of other people doing that. And I think sometimes, especially that happened to me too, that you may not know, if you're sitting around and kids are watching you just from the fact that they are seeing you play guitar or doing something that involves music. It doesn't really take, you know, as much verbally sort of instruction. Like you are a living example of what somebody can do if they can just see you doing it.
Yeah. I I was sort of in an apprenticeship program without it ever being referred to as my dad didn't say, and this is my apprentice son, Taylor. Uh, I was just sort of the loitering unpaid intern because I was 12 years old and lived in his house. But I just ended up availing myself to singing in every group I could, or if he needed me to play something or help run a rehearsal or whatever, I jumped in. But it was all proximity. I learned at the feet of somebody that was very good at what they did, and here I am.
So did he do exactly the type of work that you're doing now?
Not necessarily exactly. So he is at a large Methodist church in Houston. I'm at a large Methodist church in North Dallas area called Plano. He has written some music. I have written a lot of music. But he also started accompanying people at a very, very high level when he was a young man. And that was never of interest to me. I was never interested in being an accompanist. Um, I found more pleasure in being on a podium and running a rehearsal and like ironing things out than I think he did when he was younger. And he enjoyed sitting at a piano and helping a soloist um, bring something to life, or sitting at a piano and playing for a choir or whatever. So there are these little varying differences between us, but by and large, it's a little bit like Control C, Control V, just a copy paste kind of thing.
Okay, so as an accompanist, you mean that he was a pianist. He played piano along with people and
Right,
worked
right.
with them.
So, there are pianists that would be considered concert pianists, and they're that exists as a sort of on an island. Like they would play for um, like with orchestras or on their own, or perhaps other instrumentalists, but it's not really considered accompanying. Accompanying is its own craft, its own art form, and there are people who are absolutely brilliant pianists, but they think that their offering, their gift, their art is helping coach a singer or play for a choir or an ensemble. Um, Maybe they're playing on Broadway in a pit, but there are concert pianists who would never want to play in a pit or for a choir rehearsal. So it's these parallel tracks, and you can be exceptional at both. It's just that one is a bit more performance oriented, and the other one is a bit more guided by who you're collaborating with.
See, I love what you're saying here because I feel like if somebody was going to go on a journey like this, I mean, my first thought would be unless you're like exposed to it at an earlier age or some people that do this type of stuff, you wouldn't really know the different directions that you could take things in.
Yeah.
Like how, and I mean, I guess I like to kind of focus on the actual mechanics of it. When you say you submitted things for publication, for example, how does anybody, like, say that there's anybody that has something right now, like how does somebody even learn about how to do this or go about submitting things or where or
It is sort of insidery language. I've over the course of my lifetime, whether it was when I was a kid or now as an adult with friends that have kids, if somebody's excelling in, say, baseball or volleyball or something, they'll be put on a club team. And these club teams, uh, if you're 12, 14, 16, 18, whatever, they compete against one another across the country. And if that sounds expensive, it should, because it is expensive. And so it's like the starting point isn't even necessarily knowing um, about club teams or how to participate in sports like that. The starting point really is, can you afford as a parent to take time away from your job to drive to Florida to be a part of a tournament? It's a very, very expensive proposition. And that's before you ever get to college. And that's also, there's no guarantee that the return on investment by virtue of the kid becoming a professional volleyball player or baseball player will happen. Um, so I'm saying all of that to say music is very much the same thing. It's like you have to get into private lessons if you're going to study piano, which means you have to be able to pay somebody, or you have to have an instrument at home in order to practice. It's all very insidery if we're not careful. Um, as far as submitting music is concerned, remember I said my dad has a few things in print, and I was just able to say to him, all right, I've written this thing. Now tell me what the next part of this is so that it has life beyond just me putting notes on paper. And so he helped guide that process early on. But, you know, if anybody that's watching your channel has this wild hair idea that they might like to write something, then you go to publishers' websites, and publishers are um, perhaps specializing in different things. So, like if one of your viewers wanted to write choir music, then they would go to a publisher that publishes choir music, not just any publisher ever anywhere. Or if they were perhaps into band music, they would find a publisher that excelled at selling band music. And you submit now through their website. So you go to their website, and it'll say something about submissions or new compositions or something like that. And as a part of that, then you upload a PDF of your music or what have you. But back in the day, it was like you folded it up, put it in an envelope, sent it off. It arrived when it arrived. They would take a look at it. They would decide whether or not it fit their catalog. Could be 6 months later, you would hear yay or nay. And if you heard that they wanted it, then it was theirs. And if they didn't want it, then you could send it potentially to somebody else. So it's just this, you kind of have to know which rocks to turn over. And then once you kind of figure that out, it's a bit self guided. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I was just, laughing as you were saying about how everything used to be on paper by carrier pigeon, and it
Yeah.
had to go off and, 6 months later, does somebody like it or not, through paper mail. But yeah, like, so, okay, I mean, you had a path to kind of know how to do this, but if somebody wanted to do things like this today, they would search out certain publishers that publish specific things.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah, so I guess the next thought that I'm having, where my mind is going with this, is that